Okay, you ready? So, calling the zoning board of appeals meeting to order March 11th at 7:36. And our first order of business is petition William Williams, 465 Amity Road.
Yes.
Hello? So, oh yeah, good point. So there are 5 members of the board. We only have 4 here. If there's only 4 here, you need to have a unanimous vote. So your choice to proceed or not with that.
I'll proceed. Can I come back? What do you want to question? Oh, okay. I think I'll proceed.
Okay.
It's something I'm anxious to do, so I guess I could give you some history.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved to Woodbridge about 8 years ago, this is our 8th year.
So actually,
Oh, can you hear
you
me?
should sign in and state your name.
Oh, my name's Pat Williams,
Okay.
and you want me to sign in?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm at 465 Amity Road. And I'm requesting to build a storage space on my property for my husband's artwork. And I didn't know there were any kind of restrictions or limitations to the amount of storage space percentage for your property. I'm a little naive when it comes to this. My husband and I moved here about 8 years ago. He's an artist, and we chose the house because it has a beautiful barn, and that's where he works. But all his artwork is still in New York, and it's becoming rather burdensome to go back and forth all the time. We have about 55 years of artwork stored in New York in a loft that's rent stabilized, so we've been blessed to have it for this long. It can't last forever. So we'd like to build a storage space right to the side of our garage to store his artwork. And we need a little extra room. That's where the burden comes in for us, having to run back and forth to New York all the time. So that he can look at what he's done in the past and what he's doing now, because it's sort of revolving. So I think we need 1,200 square feet. And there's a very nice space to the side of our garage. It's sort of tucked away, so I've spoken to all of my neighbors. None of my neighbors have an issue with it. And I have plans. This is Tony Arado. He is, I think you may have a copy of the plans, is the designer that made the plans, so that the whole concept of the storage space makes the property very what would you call it? Functional, but it also looks like it's always been there. Yeah, it blends in. So
Okay.
we did move up this way because my husband was a graduate of an MFA in art from Yale, and we still have a lot of friends up in this area. Everyone seems to come back here to return to their beginnings, and we'd like to stay. And honestly, I don't know whether I'll be able to stay if we can't build the space for the work. And I've looked around at all different ideas, you know, like buying a piece of property, putting a building on it. All the taxes become just too much that way for us. So I figured this way, it's only for storage, heat and humidity controlled, and electric. There's no running water. That's it. And it's a ground floor, basically, with an attic. So the drawings would go in the attic space and the paintings would go down below. And our intention is that it stays there forever. So this piece of property, we're hoping to pass down to everybody in the family so they can maintain the collection. And, you know, if they don't want to live in the house, then they could always have a art history residence or something for now, stay there and take care of the work. So that's what I'm asking for, a little extra space.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, I have one which is obvious. So if you're looking at 1.8%, make your building 1.8% smaller. And then that solves the problem and we're done.
It does?
Well, if the issue is that the coverage exceeds by 1.8%, if that's the only issue at hand,
Well, I understand what you're saying. I have 55 years of artwork to already put in that
1.8%
little
is 20
space.
square feet.
Is what?
20 square feet.
No, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
20% of the lot.
20,
The issue is that the accessory buildings that they have that are already on the property already meet the 3%
Oh.
area of accessory space.
Okay.
right.
And so when Mrs. Williams came to speak with Terry and myself, one of the things that we noted was that tennis courts, for example, are not considered accessory, accessory buildings. And tennis courts take up a lot more space than the space that she's requesting to have for the storage building. A tennis court can average, we thought, somewhere between 22 and 24,000 square feet with the fencing and the lighting and everything else. This is, a structure. We went back through the history to see why 3% was chosen, and it comes back from the original regs in 1932, so we have really no input from the minutes that are back then to tell us why 3% was chosen. Obviously, it increases when you go into areas that are less dense, or, more dense, because then otherwise you wouldn't be able to have any kind of an accessory structure at all.
We also find it remarkable that this is really the first percentage of coverage variance request that we really had.
Yep.
Usually, we are used to seeing accessory structures that are too close to the property line, in a required yard, that sort of thing. And this is not that. There's no request for any side yard variances,
Oh,
front
no,
yard variances.
no.
It's just this rather fickle percentage of lot area coverage. And interestingly enough, it comes in the Residence A district, where our lots are of the largest sizes that we have in Woodbridge. So I think it's an interesting, an intellectually interesting request for a variance. And I think that there are, I know that the planner, the architect of this structure, and I spent a little bit of time trying to think of where else it could go on the lot, until we got, started thinking that that's not the problem at all. The problem is, it's the percentage of coverage of a lot. which when you think about it, 3% coverage of a lot area is pretty modest in our community.
The other point is that a house can cover up to 12% in a residential A area. And the house that's on this particular parcel, which is a very old house, does not take up anywhere near that 12% coverage. So there wouldn't, in the long run, there wouldn't be a coverage of the lot that was in excess of the total coverage should the house have been bigger and the accessory buildings been included in that.
So then, help me just get the numbers straight. What percentage of the property is taken up by the house, do you know?
12%, I can go down and figure it out, but it's way below the 12%. It's probably closer to 6 to 7%, because
Okay.
it's a typical, I don't wanna say, it's not a soapbox, it's
I
No,
have a footprint of
A
the
farm?
house, if
Yeah.
that's helpful at all.
Sure.
Yeah, if you do.
Yes, it would.
it's,
How far
It's
is this
teeny.
building from the boundary?
From the,
From the boundary, because you mentioned there's no, setback issue, but there's no map or anything to know where it
we're
is.
completely compliant. Along Amity Road there's a 75 front yard plus a Amity Road
50-foot center,
50
road
foot.
center line.
and it is beyond the 25-foot side yard
Right, and that's-
15
obligation.
foot
Yeah,
for detached.
15 foot from the
For
side
15
border
foot
and, right.
detached.
That's the footprint of the existing building. So the road is here.
No, I'm just trying to compute the area.
I can give you some numbers if you want to do the
Yeah.
calculation.
well, let's see.
Here was,
Yeah.
We haven't had like a town map. That would show like the parcel, like we would, I don't know if we have that, cause it's not here. I just,
No,
Okay.
that's,
just wanted
oh,
more.
you don't, yeah, you don't have a map of the lines. See what the lines are.
They wouldn't have access to the woodland, the wetlands, because I handed all that in with the wetlands, stuff with the map and everything attached.
We could go down and get that.
Everything's all right there.
Two-story building.
right.
Hmm.
14. 22, this is 11,
okay.
and a foot's 12, and 2 more is 14, so that's 22 by 15.
So it's like,
So you have 808 plus 90 plus 861.
this is really tough.
Look at this porch.
So your house can be 12%?
So, Terry, so
So
the
I-
issue is that if it's defined as an accessory building,
Correct.
The
suppose
limit's
it was
3%.
defined as a house,
That's the porch.
Wouldn't be in front of you.
4.5,
huh?
Wouldn't be in front of you.
Okay. So what would?
Well,
yeah.
You can't have two houses on a lot. So
There-
it has to
there's
be
a
You
problem.
could you could expand the
Exactly.
house.
Yes.
Not really. It's real close to the road. There's about, from there, to the road, in the front of my house.
So, if she were to choose to live in this and make this the house and store the art
In the
in
house?
the house, it's a silly, but
3% of the lot is covered by the house.
Amazing. So I should build a house?
well, that's,
so
This is
that's,
very unique.
yeah,
That's the conundrum.
right.
I mean, that's why it's in front of you. Is it, it doesn't make any sense. And it's an unusual set of circumstances. we could have, this structure would be less than 12% of the lot area if it was a house. Unfortunately, they live in a house, and it's the reason why you,
That's the reason why we bought the property
Why
for
you
the
bought-
house and the barn.
right,
So what you're saying is that between the house and the accessory buildings, if it's all up, it would be like 7.8% of the lot, is that what you're?
Correct, would still be less than the maximum of
It's
12%
less than the
that you could
12,
build
that's,
a
oh,
house.
that's,
right.
And I happen to be familiar with this house because my father restored it like 30 years ago. And so it sits, if you're familiar with where it sits very close to the road because the road's been widened in the interim. This is the house with the big fences. Amity Road narrows down and goes north.
To one lane.
So it has a big fence in front of it to help give them a little bit of privacy. So where the house sits, the septic system is off to the southwest corner, so they really can't go out that way because that's where the septic system is.
Right.
And
We can only
then-
go out, we could only extend out 8 or 10 feet.
And then there's a stream, a wetland stream that runs through the middle of it. So they've actually gone to the Wetlands Commission and gotten permission to situate it where it is. So they can't shove anything further back because
No.
the wetlands is there. So it's an interesting
So,
conundrum.
so at least the way you're describing it then, part of my
If
concern.
you want, let me go get you a site plan. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that would be good.
Could you look at the wetlands?
Yeah.
see, in terms of,
Yeah, that would be, let me make it work.
they should have given,
Right. Oh, that's what.
that's what she's getting at, I know.
Christine,
Can you imagine, Bill?
when she emailed
You can
us,
build
she
a new
said,
house, but you can't,
I said, really?
you can build a new house, but you can't have a storage space.
Think how it gets started.
And then I said, it's been so long, maybe we should put
See, we don't wanna use that, lower yard over, where the whole lawn is on the lower yard off to the right.
No, and that's reserved for sale.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a state.
But it can go for, they don't really need the whole
parking
space,
in the office.
but I don't wanna block that whole view
But
on the side.
none of that would solve your
No.
percentage coverage.
No, it wouldn't, you're
So-
right, unless I had to build a house.
It happened once. Somebody wanted to build a barn
Well,
and without a house on it, and this person wanted to live in the barn with the horse.
oh my,
Um,
I'm beginning to sound real normal.
So Terry, if this were if this is an accessory building and following zoning, what's the maximum size it could be?
Want to do that math?
It's 1.2%.
You see, it's the other accessory buildings that are already present, which skew this.
Okay.
So you have a site plan?
I do.
I should have brought a
Christine
picture.
borrowed it, so she can take a copy.
Oh, okay,
I think she's gonna make copies for all the members.
yeah. She's fast on the stairs.
She is fast.
Thanks.
This helps a lot.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So to the front of the house is Amity Road. And the lines that you see over here, this is the beginning of the wetland corridor, where you see
Okay.
these little arrows going in. That's wetlands.
Right.
So nothing can go back beyond that area. And then the septic is down in this area here.
Okay.
So this is where the storage facility, or barn, whatever you wanna call it, is proposed to be, is over here. And if you look at the other two buildings, They occupy 3% of the lot, and the house is basically the same size.
So, the way I've been thinking about it is that to do a variance, there needs to be a physical hardship, right, Terry?
Hardship in the land.
Hardship in the land.
Yes, that's one.
Okay.
Hardship on the land?
I've distributed a,
Right, yeah, and
For our-
that's
for our
partly what I was
edification.
thinking about.
we easily get to that hardship of land, which is one of the reasons. But the actual phrase is unfortunately a long one. But when a literal enforcement of such bylaws or ordinances or regulations would result in exceptional difficulty or unusual hardship, so that a substantial justice will be done and public safety and welfare is secured, providing that the zoning regulations may specify to the extent that uses may not be permitted by variance, which we don't do. So, while we're used to saying the words unusual hardship, we also have exceptional difficulty, and the whole phrase is that substantial justice will be done and that the public safety and welfare is secure. So, if we are presently at a 3% and we wish to go to more, I presumably, and we wish to go to 4.8% of the lot area with accessory buildings, seeing as though the house is not consuming all of its coverage area, the judgment that we're looking for from you is, does this violate our senses in terms of lot area coverage? This section is really important if we have very small lots, where you don't give people enough places to garden or to have a sense of space around themselves, their privacy. Certainly, in other districts of the town that has traditionally smaller lots, they have a larger percentage coverage, obviously, but this is a bit different, we think.
Do people have other questions for the hearing part of this? Any other comments?
What do you mean by hardship on the land when you read that through?
For example, if it was entirely, and it's hard for a coverage variance. This is a unique type of variance for Woodbridge. But we're used to seeing, for example, that if you wanted to build an addition onto your house, in the rear of your house, you might be in the required front yard because your house is so close to the road.
Right.
You might have to go outside your house to get into the rest of your house. That would be an unusual hardship if you weren't granted. And many of our older homes were built close to the road when they were built. And it's common for this board to hear variance requests for front yard variances because of that. And because of this statutory language, we get to apply judgment based on whether or not this is an unusual hardship that we're asking from, and many people can claim that. We also have had, interesting claims of unusual hardship. One person's unusual hardship is not another's. We've had people who've lived on corner lots who have 2 front yards, who want relief of that. We've had people who had 3 front yards who wanted relief from that. So it depends on the property. Every property is rather unique.
So if my house is only 3% of the property, you're saying, I still have 9% of a house that I could build, but could walk to?
You could build a bigger house. You would need front yard variances. You would need other variances.
Yeah, I don't really want a bigger house. I love my house, so
Yeah, but, and that.
I'm just
that-
trying to understand.
So I think some of the way we're thinking about it is, we're talking about land issues that are independent of who's living there and independent of what the buildings are going to be used for. So if somebody says, I want to do this because my mother-in-law, so on and so forth, that's not a land hardship. That's a family hardship. And this is important because a variance will continue on beyond the owners of the land. Right? So you end up selling it, somebody else has that variance. Right? And so that's why it's important to think about,
I understand
is it a
that.
variance
Yeah, okay.
related to the people or to the land? Now, it sounds like, and this is what we'll need to discuss, is this an unusual situation, a land-related hardship that justifies giving a variance?
And you might mitigate your concern about just that, by the way, because it's not a coverage area request for a residence, but for an accessory structure.
Right.
And so, we're not, in this particular case, fearful of that, of the dreaded mother-in-law or father-in-law.
Right.
And our regulations are not such that if we were to think of this as having a total lot area budget, where the 12% of the house could be added to the 3% of the accessory structures, and as long as we didn't go beyond, we're not that sophisticated. We chose a 12% back in 1935. We chose a 3% in 1935, and here we are. So it's an interesting.
Yeah. So, with that, are there other questions we need to ask in the hearing phase? Okay, so we should perhaps close the hearing and move on to the next hearing. And then what we'll do is, after we've heard all of these, we will sit back and deliberate, unless we should deliberate. I'm trying to think because I don't know the last time we had 2 parcels in the same one. Do we deliberate before we go to the next hearing, or do we hear?
No, you can do it all at the end, it's okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So with that, we will move on
Well,
to hear the next case.
I thank you for listening.
And we'll deliberate, and you're welcome to stay, or,
Or you can
Or-
give me a call in the morning,
yeah.
whatever works for you.
Okay, this wasn't mine, right?
No, that's safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so our next item is PLH LLC appellant for 57 Park Lane.
I didn't have an agenda, so I didn't know if there was anyone else in front of me.
That's okay.
Would you like me to sign in here?
Sign in,
Okay.
state your name, and present your case.
My name is Chris Little. I am here representing PLH LLC regarding a matter. We are proposing a 999 kilowatt ground mounted solar farm on an 8.56 acre parcel of land. And there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that addresses this type of use. So in speaking with the planning staff, it was suggested that we apply for a variance, knowing that there is nothing that addresses solar in the zoning code. The closest thing we could find is utility substations, which are a permitted use in this zone. That could be, I think, taken into consideration with respect to solar in this case. So I guess I'm here before you requesting a variance to allow for a solar farm, a ground-mounted solar farm on this parcel of land. And I can get into the particulars of that if that's something you're interested in on what these facilities entail. They're foreign to some people. They're becoming more common in Connecticut especially. More so, I would say, in Eversource's service territory where land is abundantly available. When you get down into United Illuminating service territory, and they also have solar programs, land is much harder to come by, especially at the prices that we need to support solar energy. And that's mainly the reason this parcel was selected. Was it was available, the price was able to support solar, but more importantly, what's very difficult is to find a location to interconnect into the grid to deliver the energy at an affordable price. The utilities down here are extremely expensive when it comes to upgrading distribution circuits. So typically developers like us like to be located as close to a substation as possible. And I don't know if you can see on I probably didn't include any details regarding where the substation is, but if you look at this map here, the substation, if you run through the transmission line, it's literally right here. So it's almost adjacent. The corner of our parcel touches that substation. The facility itself is unmanned. Once built, there'd be very little traffic to and from it, way less than a single family resident. They don't make any noise. We use fanless inverters. Transformer is centrally located, doesn't make any more noise than your typical pole mounted transformer. These are fixed tilt racking systems, so they're not, moving throughout the day and making noise. Sometimes the tracker systems can make some noise. Unless the project participates in what's known as the state's virtual net metering program, it is subject to personal property taxation. There is an exemption for virtual net metering. We don't have any allocation for that. The program's exhausted. So our revenue comes from what they refer to as a low emission or zero emission renewable energy contract with United Illuminating, and then we sell the power wholesale. That's the current plan for this facility. So with that, I'd like to know if anyone has any questions.
Are there
Yes.
any safety issues that we need to be concerned about?
Great question. All of the voltages are below the NEC code requirements. To have a NEC code, anything over 1500 volts requires I have to double check on that because I know I'm not an NEC code expert, but we don't have to have a 8-foot fence with a 1-foot barbed wire rampart like you see around a substation. Everything out there is safe to the touch. The only risk would be if you went in with a crowbar and tried to open up our cabinets. But everything else is you can go and touch the solar panels. We would put a fence around it, but very often we put like a low chain link or an agricultural type fence we can put around it too, depending on, I'm assuming we would work with the planning commission on site plan details, landscaping, aesthetics, things like that.
And what kind of things do you typically do for aesthetics?
Landscaping, depending on the site, everything is different. This site's fully wooded, and we would anticipate maintaining at least some of the natural vegetation around the edges to screen the neighboring properties. This property, when you approach it on Park Lane, you have to go up a big hill, and then it kind of tails down, and then it really slopes off after you get towards the substation. The bulk of the facility would be built in the middle, so you wouldn't see it coming from Park Lane. It would be totally invisible. There may be some vision corners from the north and the south, but the vegetation is pretty thick in there, and if we could do an aesthetics plan, if there's any exposure, we could do some, year-round non-deciduous arborvitaes or things like that to help screen the site.
And what kind of issues can arise in the construction of this thing?
Well, one of the challenges with this site is going to be the ledge out there. There's a lot of rock out in this area. So we would likely use a product that's uses a screw type system, which drills right into the rock, or a ballasted system, which is basically a concrete footing that rests right on the ledge. There'll probably be some fill brought in to level out the site a little bit. I think it'll need some balancing. The other challenges are obtaining interconnection with the utilities. We're well through that process with United Illuminating, but I don't have a definitive answer from them yet. So that's contingent.
And total time to complete the project?
This is a pretty small project, so I think start to finish should be in the 3 to 3.5 month range.
So there wouldn't be that much disruption to local environment or traffic?
No, and the deliveries are pretty minimal. We could limit them per day if needed, or try to have everything shipped on site in a very short period to get it out of the way. It can be done a couple of different ways logistically. So,
Are there considerations we should be thinking about, Terry, that we're missing?
Well, that's an open-ended question. sir.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think that we're here tonight because our zoning regulations did not anticipate this as a use. And in our zoning regulations, if we don't say that you can use it, you can't. Except for maybe the frogs. Crickets, pardon me. I think that we tried to think of this as a utility substation sort of use, which would be allowed. But we think that that's a stretch at the end of the day. I think it's remarkable because of its proximity to and somebody that can receive this electricity. We would normally, if this was an allowed use, this would normally be in front of your town planning and zoning commission, who would discuss the site plan issues. They would love to discuss, I'm sure, the clearing. They would make sure that there would be no stone walls adversely affected along Park Lane or any other area. They would talk about clearing issues. They would talk about reflectance. But they can't hear this application because they can't approve anything that isn't in our zoning regulations, even though they could put this in their zoning regulations. And by the way, we've took the liberty of discussing with them at their last meeting the fact that Gene, maybe you wanna think about this. We also took a look at this, is this farming?
Right.
And in Connecticut, farming has both a historical and a wide-ranging, things that are farming are unbelievable, described as farming. You know, the harvest of trees is considered farming. I imagine you'll be doing a little bit of that here.
Yes.
But we also decided that we didn't think it was farming either. So we've tried to look at this in many different aspects of land use regulation.
Is this property zoned for farming?
Residence A is, you're allowed to farm.
As long as you have a minimum of 5 acres in a
Okay,
residential
this
A
is
district,
like
you could have
8
a farm.
acres, right?
8.56, yeah.
It sounds like the terrain of this property really limits its use for most other things, as he mentions about
I
the.
can't imagine a septic system going into this rocky soil, by the way, or if you did, whether or not the slope would be susceptible to many other uses.
So there's a hardship there in that sense.
Are there any restrictions on commercial use of the property?
Well, only insofar as, you know, this use is not among uses that would be allowed.
But if
Typically in
it
our
were-
Residence A zone, by the way, we have churches. Let me not be the person that describes, religion as a commercial use, but it kind of looks and feels more like not a residential use. We have, large horse barns and riding places that are allowed.
Okay.
So, we are not, pure as the given snow.
Generally, when they're looking, for instance, with a resident office, the commission, the zoning regs speak to how many visits are gonna go back and forth and whatnot, and has been represented, once the site gets developed, there really isn't
Right.
any traffic that goes there. So the caution has always been with a use, especially with a home office, is how many trips are you gonna have? What's it gonna look like? Is it gonna disturb the residential character of the neighborhood? And so that's a call that, you get to make.
Okay.
And it's not uncommon for towns like this to not have anything that address their
Right.
solar, because it's starting to, it's been around now for a while, but it's not common in these parts, and I think that's one of the reasons that the state siting council typically has jurisdiction for anything over 1 megawatt and above.
Okay. And so you're just under
I'm just
the wire
underneath
and-
that.
Okay.
It does give the town though an opportunity to be involved and have feedback and interject in the site plan. If it goes to the siting council, then the town, they'll still have a voice, but they'll lose control over
Right.
the process. So that's something to consider.
Yeah.
In this particular site also, the family that had you purchased it, the company purchased it from, had tried to figure out, was there any way to subdivide it or develop it? Because, it was owned by the heirs of a family and they just couldn't, I know they spent, because I've spent quite a bit of time with them, looking at it and whatnot, but it's a very challenging site from a residential perspective in terms of its slope and the amount of
Yeah.
ledge and whatnot that's there. And it wouldn't send any kids to school.
That's true.
Other things we've not thought to ask about that we should have? Or do you guys have any other questions?
No, I guess more for discussion with,
Well, do you want to speak to the reflectance issue at all, just so that it's in the record?
Absolutely. The solar panels are designed to absorb electricity. There is a small percent that can be reflected. It's a matte material though, so it's not going to be like a mirror like you would think. In fact, you see these now popping up at international airports. Denver's a classic example where they're surrounding the runways. We could certainly do a glare analysis. Typically that's more of a concern for highly traveled roads or highways where you're gonna have people driving and potentially having that glare in their eyes. I don't think there's a lot of traffic going through here, and there's gonna be so much wooded surrounding that I don't anticipate that being an issue, especially how little is actually reflected. If they reflected a ton of irradiance, it wouldn't be doing its job and actually absorbing the energy. But it is a very common concern, and we have done reflection studies before in the past.
And when you're gonna disturb a fair amount of this land,
Yeah, we have to remove the trees to accommodate the solar.
and that would include the root systems.
Maybe. In a lot of the areas, if we use this product with the screw-based foundation, it's
Like a
manufactured.
technopost.
Yeah, it's a company called TerraSmart makes it. Or the ballasted system, there would be some stumps that wouldn't have to be removed. But I would say I wouldn't want to be limited, because in areas where we need to take them out, we need to take them out.
So you would not be against then if a condition of their approval might be the submission of a erosion control plan
Oh, no, we would absolutely do one
that,
of those.
because you're disturbing more than a half acre, that would guarantee that we wouldn't have an erosion over a 7-acre slope that would be unmanageable and adversely affecting any.
Yes, and
neighboring
we would
parcel.
anticipate obtaining a general permit through the state.
Mhm.
And there's no wetlands issues.
There's a pocket of wetlands
Shown on the map, I think.
shown on the map, I believe.
I
to-
did
To the
a
south.
wetland delineation, so I could,
Yeah.
I could provide you with a copy, but I didn't bring it or submit it because it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's not extensively a wetland, but there is a pocket.
I can,
South, I'm trying to think, southwest?
no, it's actually in the very, northeast corner.
Okay.
Down, but actually towards the substation, it's kind of
Oh,
right
okay.
in here.
Okay. I was
It's
thinking.
it's a pretty small pocket.
So we've we've learned that where there's a
Okay.
restrictive layer, meaning this site, it's frequently to have wetlands because, wetlands is a poorly drained area. So, and in my mind, it's all just a management issue. If you get close enough to it with construction activity, you're gonna require a wetlands permit.
Yeah. We're not anticipating impacting that wetland one bit.
Mhm. I think the slope will kill the notion of it before the wetlands issue before you get too close to the
Yes, that's 100% correct.
wetlands. Right.
Yeah.
And the only other thing that to answer your very broad question is, adjacent to the substation, is a shopping center in another community.
Mhm.
Do you believe that your solar farm would be visible from that adjacent community?
Well, I walked out there earlier today, and I was standing in the middle of the site, and I couldn't see any of the retail from where I was standing. Now, I didn't go all the way deep in there, but once you get further into the site, there's a steep hill going down towards the substation. So I would imagine they're gonna be looking up at the hill, and there might be some limited exposure, but I can't imagine very much. I without doing an aesthetics analysis, I couldn't say for certain.
So the other question I have is, currently we have a fair amount of residences with residential solar, is that correct?
We have a good deal, and in fact, we have some of the largest commercial solar installations in the state. We have, on the JCC parking lot,
Right.
we have the second largest commercial solar installation in the state. We were first for the longest time until UI built themselves at the Bridgeport transfer station, the largest one that presently exists. We have a temple whose roof is covered with solar cells, and we have a school that has one half of our roof covered with solar cells. So we are not unaccustomed to large solar cell installations, and have enthusiastically approached as a community this solution to what I understand our electrical rate is only second to that of that is experienced in Hawaii. And Hawaii, the extension cord is a little longer than ours. But it's a topic of great conversation at the both national, state and local level.
And do you know offhand what the kilowattage of the JCC solar is?
I don't know offhand, but I'd be happy to.
I was just wondering, sort of relative to this proposed project.
I don't think it's a megawatt.
I thought it was 30.
This, you have the
Somehow
wetlands
34 is
delineated
in my
on
head.
this,
I don't think it's.
Yeah, that's correct.
including the distance you have to be from the well. I think you have like a impact line.
Oh, yeah, is that shown on that map?
Yeah, yeah. So it's out,
Yeah, it's
it's
probably a
outside
100-foot
of the,
buffer.
yeah, it's outside the buffer.
We don't have buffers, we just have regulated areas.
But it's,
Well, our
but it's
civil engineer
delineated.
showed a buffer.
But it's delineated.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
qualifying that we don't.
Yep.
we
Yeah,
just
I have
don't
a
buffers.
report too.
We have regulated areas and they're a minimum of 100 feet.
So does your plan show a access road along the property line off of Park Lane?
That's currently what's being shown, but this is more for indicative discussion purposes than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was in part to avoid some of the ledge too, on that site. Because there's some big outcroppings. There's a few that are the size of a house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that you're leaving them there,
Very much so.
right?
We aren't proposing any blasting at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? So are we ready to close this hearing? Are you here to comment on either of the proposals? Yeah,
I'm just observing.
Okay.
Yeah.
good. So, and you're welcome to comment if you care, but,
Thank you.
okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you. So, deliberating on the Williams property.
Well, my concern with that particular one is I wonder if this is the proper place to seek the remedy. Is it, because it went back to saying, well, this was what zoning did in 1932 or whatever it was, and for no particular reason. But if we then change it, now we've set a precedent for what coverage should be or allowed for accessory buildings. And so I'm not sure that this is the right place to adjudicate it. It seems to me as though it really should be a zoning issue, and they can decide with 2019 eyes what the number should be, whether it should be 3% or 8% or 12%. I don't know how they come up with these numbers. So my only concern is that this decision becomes very, very wide-ranging. It sets a precedent, and so this is now the new standard. Because once you set the new standard of 4.8%, it's now 4.8%. As opposed to a single thing.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that it's a precedental action?
Why do I think that? Because if someone else comes in front of this board and says, well, but you granted this other one at 4.8, it's gonna be very hard to say, no, I don't think so. So that then becomes the new standard. And maybe it should be 6%, I don't know. But it seems to me that it's setting a precedent which is very broad.
So, when I first read the proposal, that was exactly what I was thinking, and my reaction before the hearing was that, yeah, if we want to change that, that's something that should be tossed over to zoning. However, in terms of the discussion, it seems like we can have a very narrowly crafted variance based on and as I see it, it ends up being a variance related to the dwelling, the living space, in that what they could do is they could build something much larger as an extension of their living space without a need for variance in terms of the amount of space being taken up. It would require a variance in terms of setback or whatever, which, if anything, ends up, in my mind, presenting an argument for there's a hardship that they're looking for additional space. The appropriate way to do that within the current zoning rules would be to expand the house, but there are substantial land hardships related to that. So I'm sort of thinking that if we approach it that way of, yeah, anytime somebody has a house that adding the amount of space that they need to the existing dwelling could be done without going above the permitted land or footprint and doesn't present any other issues. Yeah, that's kind of the issues we're looking at as I see it right now.
Okay.
The other thing with this building is, I mean, they have a certain planned use for it, but down the road, couldn't it be like another residential structure? I know that it's not gonna have running water, but I mean, that could be put in. I mean, I'm just saying it's not, it's actually, looks like it has a larger footprint than any of the other buildings, if you look at it. So, I don't know.
No, I think that the only thing, we're not, in this particular zone, we're not allowed to have more than one dwelling unit per lot. We have a pretty good track record with that. We recently allowed a person with an older home to live in that home while he builds another home. And there's an obligation to remove the older home after the new one is done. So I don't know that there's a residential risk. A future user could use whatever the Residence A district would allow it to be used as an accessory building. They could raise chickens, they could, put it to some tobacco drying, purpose. You could, there's lots of agriculturally, Residence A district type of uses that it could be used for. You're right. There's nothing saying that, I don't think it's reasonable at all to, in your decision, to limit it to the storage of art, because that would be just so very fickle that wouldn't pass any test whatsoever. But I don't think it could become a residence unless, of course, in the broadest of circumstances, one would want to make that the present home an accessory structure and live in amongst the art, like the person who wanted to live in the barn with the horse.
You have any thoughts, comments, Jeff?
I see Henry's point, but I don't think that, like, if you push this to zoning, then you're looking at changing zoning rules, but we have the we have the bit here to say, okay, like, to single case it and say, it's okay for this, but the next guy that comes, we're like, no, that's, the rules haven't changed, the rules are the same. And so that's our,
It's more with this specific lot.
correct. And I don't know, do we say okay with some caveats? I don't know if that's necessary or not, because like say, okay, you can't turn the thing into a dwelling because there's already existing, and I don't need it to double up that, right?
Right.
And
I
that
mean,
was,
that would require another variance, by the way, to do that,
right,
to make a second dwelling
right.
unit. Right.
So my only concern to keep that away is like, say, okay, you're not gonna put plumbing in it, and so for me, that's enough. As long as there's no, no plumbing fit, even a laboratory or stuff that gets to be, that starts to get down that slippery slope where you could live there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it seems as if, in sort of writing up the variance, if we decide to go that route, the rationale would be what's establishing the precedent, right? And the rationale is that something along the lines that it's a small dwelling, that it would be prohibitive to expand the dwelling to provide the accessory space. And so in this particular case, it is less of a hardship to build an accessory building to provide the additional space, right? And by framing it that way in the rationale for a variance, that would address the concern of, no, we're not saying that you can go above 5% or whatever the number is without a variance.
I think it's really important to state the reasons for your decision.
Right.
We're taught that constantly by literature, so absolutely.
Excuse me.
Any other discussion? Anyone want to make a motion? I'll move that we approve the variance.
I'll second the motion.
I'll vote in favor.
So before we do the vote, is there discussion on the motion? Okay, ready to call the vote? All in favor?
Sorry.
Opposed?
That's not gonna pass.
Okay,
So now how do I move forward? Now do I apply for a variance to build onto my house?
that's one possible way to approach it. Another one would be,
Yeah, I think they have redress also through the courts.
Yeah, but
I think there's a number of things that we could be happy to talk with you about it.
Okay.
I mean, one could ask to change the zoning regulations.
right,
At the town planning and zoning commission to revisit the issue of the pickle percentage.
I'm just saying, I don't have that many years left.
right.
I don't want this done after my time. Because I want it in place for my kids and my grandkids, so they have a place to take care of the artwork.
I'd be happy to discuss with you some alternatives.
Correct. Sounds good. Thank you for letting me
Okay.
know.
Okay, the second property? Discussion?
It seems that the site is a hardship in itself, just from
Correct.
looking at, I don't think there's a lot, they're presenting a use that could fit it, and it doesn't sound like, from what Chris said, a lot of the current owners, they really couldn't come up with other viable, reasonable approach. I think the property does present a legitimate hardship in terms of use, and I think they have to me, it seems like a reasonable proposal to use it. That's my
Yeah.
initial thought of it.
I think I think the property, like, if they tried to subdivide it and break it in, then they couldn't, like,
Right.
right, they couldn't break it into small, like, the right size pieces to build houses, and then you can't build a house on it.
Right.
Do we need to be thinking of this in terms of a hardship? Because it seems like the underlying question is the
Well, there's no
idea
zoning.
of,
There isn't any zone. It's either,
It-
it's silent on this issue.
right,
So you can now create
Mm.
a decision which is, because it's silent on it.
Yeah, but I think right away with the site is a hard, we're faced with this very difficult to use property and presenting, there is a hardship to do anything with it and presenting a viable use. So it seems like it's something we should consider positively.
so to me, the question is this substantially similar to a substation, sufficiently enough to justify it with that? And for that matter, I'm not sure what the discussions were about whether or not it constitutes farming. But I believe that there's some state law which addresses solar farms as farming.
Interesting.
So it seems to me within either approach, it seems to fit within a generally permitted use. And again, we've got the example of solar being used in lots of other property.
Terry, on what basis the JCC built this, but how was that,
It's an accessory use to an established use, no problem.
It's just a roof over the parking lot,
Right.
so, right, it's free
Right.
I
space.
see. All right. It's a different.
Similar to what they're doing with the
With
police
the police,
department.
Pleased with a carport.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, no, I've just
Right.
wondered.
Yeah.
And the other large installation's been on actual roofs of buildings,
Yeah.
so, so no lot area coverage, now, no use, it's all accessory to an established use.
So, to the best of your knowledge, there hasn't been any freestanding solar like next to a house?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
We have numerous
Okay.
ground-mounted arrays
Yep.
in almost every neighborhood. We even have one that is pretty cool because it tracks the sun. It's a very small scale.
Right.
It takes a mad scientist homeowner, and I say this with all great affection, by the way, who designed this and built it himself, of being able to have it track. They are by nature small
Right.
and accessory to an established use.
Just-
This is the first thing. And by the way, this has been a big conversation with town-owned land. We have actively, as a town, we have actively looked for sites that are near substations or near utility company assets that could receive power, and in particularly our closed landfill, by the way. And so I think that this is not an issue that one has only heard of
Right.
and will be never heard of again. I know in Massachusetts, there's a movement about squandering prime farmland, for solar cell use. I don't think there's anybody that could describe this as prime farmland. So, I don't think a plow would do much of good where this is. It may get the sun, but it doesn't, have any other attributes.
Interestingly enough, the state apparently has passed Public Act number 13298, which is an act concerning implementation of Connecticut's comprehensive energy strategy and various revisions to the energy statutes. And the new law lets agricultural customers, so this is agricultural customers, but just interestingly enough, of Connecticut Light and Power and United Illuminating to own solar farms up to 3 megawatts and sell the solar power to serve the needs of up to 10 other farms, towns, cities, or even certain electric customers. It's called virtual net metering, and what they note is that roughly 6 acres of open and shade-free land is required for every megawatt of solar installed. Thus, a solar farmer would utilize 8 acres, so this is considerably under that acreage to install a 3 megawatt solar farm. So the state has gone ahead with
Right.
allowing farms to have.
And it's specifically that bill that I was thinking of in terms of
That's what you
the
wrote.
permitted use of agricultural land as, for solar farming.
So in this case, while there's no farm that's being served by it, it's allowing a use that isn't even compromising good
Right.
farmland to be put to use.
And it's adjacent to,
And it's adjacent to a substation. The wonders of Google.
Is there a, I have a question for you. Is there a wrinkle for this being just, really
You
close to
can't
1
ask him
megawatt?
any more questions once
Okay.
you close the hearing.
That's fine.
Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm just curious. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I'm just curious what it is.
Is there other further discussion? Do we have a motion?
Sure.
What are you moving?
Moving heaven and earth. I move that we approve this.
Okay,
I've seconded.
okay. Any discussion before calling the vote?
No discussion.
Call the vote, all in favor? Right? Okay. Okay. So.
I gave you 2 sets of minutes,
Right, so,
if you can remember that part.
right, so we have the minutes to the regular meeting of September 17th.
Does anybody remember that?
Read the minutes and find out.
Interestingly enough, the variance that was granted for this, he's going to be taking down that house and building a zoning compliant house, just so you know.
Taking the house down first.
He's gonna take the house down, and once he removes that nonconformity, he's now going to build a conforming house.
So,
Yes, yeah, right.
yeah.
So the variances that you granted in
Doesn't matter.
September are
He's
moved,
not- he's
are
not gonna
moved,
do
because he's
that.
not gonna use them.
He's gonna move out of this house.
Okay.
I guess the economics caught up with it.
So do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Sure, I move we approve the minutes
Yes.
from 17 September.
Okay. And second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And for the meetings of the October 9th regular meeting?
Yeah, I remember. Okay.
we have
I'll
a
put it
motion
in.
to
They'll-
approve
they'll be
them?
happy.
Yeah, motion to approve the minutes, October 9.
Okay, second? All in favor?
All right.
Okay. Is there any other business? Okay.
We'll just note that, Mr. Wisney is gonna be going to the, what is it? Connecticut Bar Association Land Use Seminar coming up, because I registered you for that.
It's the last Saturday of this
Saturday
month.
in March, so,
Yeah, because it's a wet, isn't it wetlands,
it covers all aspects of land use, so, it's something that everybody
it's a
can take
wetland
advantage of,
university.
and Bob's
She
taking.
sent a notice out about it,
Yeah.
yeah.
We find it a very useful seminar.
We go there.
We have one member from planning and zoning who's going
Oh,
to,
good.
so.
Good.
Great.
Great. Any other business? I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Here tomorrow.
That's a jury.
Okay. Thank you.